In the 9th century of the Common Era, the greatest cities in the Western Hemisphere fell silent. Temples taller than anything Europe would build for another 500 years vanished beneath strangling roots and ceiba canopy. An entire written language, the only fully developed script in the pre-Columbian Americas, stopped being carved into stone. And yet the people who created all of it never disappeared. More than 6 million of them are alive today, speaking the same language families, planting the same sacred crop, inhabiting the same landscape. This is the Maya, and their story stretches across more than 3,000 years. What follows is the complete journey. From the first foragers grinding wild teosinte along highland rivers 7,000 years before the Common Era, through the rise of colossal pre-Classic cities like El Mirador, into the age of divine kings waging star wars across the Petén, through the brilliance of Palenque under Kinich Janab Pakal, into the catastrophic droughts and collapses of the 9th century, northward to Chichen Itza and the merchant states of the post-Classic, through the fires of Spanish invasion, and forward into a living present where Maya communities endure and reclaim what was taken. This is not a fragment. This is the full life of a civilization, its origins, its grandeur, its fractures, its survival. And it matters now more than ever. Since 2018, laser scanning technology has revealed tens of thousands of structures hidden beneath the jungle, rewriting everything scholars believed about the scale of Maya urbanism. The story is still being uncovered. It is still unfolding. If you value complete journeys through the rise and transformation of civilizations, subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Each week, we bring you the full story of a world that shaped history. Let us begin where all great stories begin, with the land itself. The forest breathes. Moisture rises from the limestone earth in slow curtains of vapor, threading upward through ceiba roots and strangler figs into a canopy so dense that sunlight reaches the ground only in scattered coins of gold. Somewhere beneath this green darkness, water moves through stone, filtering down through porous karst into subterranean rivers that will not see daylight for kilometers. This is the world as it exists around 7,000 years before the Common Era, in the humid lowlands of what will one day be called the Yucatan. No temples rise above the treetops, no causeways cut through the swamps, no glyphs mark the passage of time. There is only the forest, and within it small bands of people moving through its corridors with an intimacy born of millennia. They are foragers, families numbering perhaps 20 or 30 individuals who follow seasonal rhythms older than memory. Along the Pacific coastal plain, where mangrove estuaries meet the open sea, they harvest shellfish from tidal flats, leaving behind middens of discarded shell that will endure for thousands of years. In the volcanic highlands of what is now Guatemala, they climb obsidian outcrops where black volcanic glass fractures into edges sharper than surgical steel. They nap these stones into points and scrapers, tools for processing game and plant fiber alike. Their camps are temporary, brush shelters near water sources, fire pits ringed with river cobbles, grinding stones worn smooth from processing wild seeds and tubers. But the world is changing. The great ice sheets that once locked water in continental glaciers have retreated, and sea levels have risen to approximate their modern positions. Rainfall patterns shift. The tropical forests thicken and expand. And in the highland valleys far to the west, along the Balsas River drainage of central Mexico, A transformation is underway that will reshape human civilization across the continent. A wild grass called teosinte, its tiny seed cases barely worth the effort of collection, is being slowly, unconsciously altered by human selection. By 5,000 years before the Common Era, the earliest recognizable maize cobs appear in those western valleys, their kernels still small and few, but edible, storable, plantable. It takes more than 1,000 years for this cultivated grain to travel the trade routes and mountain passes into the Maya region. By 3,400 years before the Common Era, maize pollen appears in lake sediment cores from the Petén lowlands, evidence that people are clearing small forest patches, burning undergrowth, and planting the first tentative milpas. Squash and beans follow. The forest is no longer merely traversed, it is being shaped. Along the Soconusco coast of the Pacific Piedmont, where rich estuarine resources already support denser populations, communities begin to settle permanently. By 2,000 years before the Common Era, villages of pit houses cluster near freshwater sources, oval depressions dug into the earth, roofed with thatch and pole frames. Women grind maize on stone metates, the rhythmic scraping audible across the settlement at dawn. The Mokaya people of this coastal strip produce the earliest known pottery in Mesoamerica by 1,900 years before the Common Era. The Barra phase ceramics, thin-walled vessels with tecumate forms designed for liquid storage, their surfaces sometimes decorated with simple incised lines or red slip. The Lacona phase follows, bringing larger vessels, more elaborate decoration, and evidence of feasting. Communal meals that bind families into something larger than kinship alone. These are not yet cities. There are no kings, no written calendars, no monumental platforms of cut stone. But the essential ingredients are assembling: stored surplus, settled populations, emerging social distinctions visible in burial goods and house size, and a deepening relationship with cultivated land that ties people to place across generations. The forest canopy still reigns. The limestone still holds its secrets underground. But beneath the silence of this world without writing, the foundations of something vast are being laid. Grain by grain, village by village, season by season. By the second millennium before the Common Era, the villages have taken root. Smoke rises from cooking fires in clearings hacked from the lowland forest, where families tend plots of maize, squash, and manioc in the rotational rhythm of milpa agriculture. The soil, thin and hungry above the limestone bedrock, yields its nutrients quickly and must be left to recover beneath secondary growth. But the people do not move on. They stay, bound now to place by something more than food, by the graves of ancestors buried beneath house floors, by the accumulated weight of generations who have worked the same earth. To the west, along the Gulf Coast lowlands of what is now Tabasco and southern Veracruz, the Olmec civilization has already reached its florescence. San Lorenzo and later La Venta produce colossal basalt heads, elaborate jade figurines, and a symbolic vocabulary of jaguars, feathered serpents, and maize deities that radiates outward along trade routes. These routes carry more than obsidian and greenstone. They carry ideas about cosmic order, about the relationship between rulers and supernatural forces, about the power of carved stone to make authority visible and permanent. By around 1,000 years before the Common Era, Olmec influence reaches deep into the Maya lowlands. Jade celts and carved pendants bearing Olmec iconography appear at sites across the Petén and the Pacific Piedmont. The exchange is not passive. Maya communities absorb, reinterpret, and transform what arrives from the West. The jaguar motif persists but acquires local meaning. The maize god, that figure of death and resurrection, of the seed buried in darkness and reborn as green stalk, becomes central to an emerging cosmology that will define Maya civilization for millennia. At Nakbe, in the dense forest of northern Petén, occupation begins during this period. By around 750 years before the Common Era, something unprecedented emerges from the jungle floor. Massive platforms of cut limestone rise to heights of 18 meters, faced with plaster and crowned with temples arranged in triadic groupings, a central structure flanked by two smaller buildings oriented to frame the sky. This triadic form, repeated across dozens of later sites, encodes a cosmological principle. The three hearthstones of creation, the three stars of Orion's belt that the Maya will associate with the cosmic hearth, where the world was kindled into being. These are not the works of simple villagers. The labor required to quarry, transport, and stack millions of limestone blocks demands coordinated effort on a scale that implies emerging hierarchies, leaders who can command surplus labor, who justify their authority through ritual knowledge and supernatural sanction. At Tikal, east of Nakbe, an E-group complex takes shape. A western pyramid aligned with an eastern platform so that observers standing atop the western structure can mark the solstice and equinox sunrise positions against the eastern building's edges. The sky becomes a calendar. Architecture becomes an instrument of astronomical precision. The 260-day cycle known as the Tzolk'in crystallizes during these centuries, 13 numbers interlocking with 20 day names in a permutation that tracks ritual time, agricultural omens, and human destiny. Its origins may lie in the approximately 260 days between maize planting and harvest in highland regions, or in the human gestation period. Whatever its source, it becomes the heartbeat of Maya sacred time, running alongside the 365-day solar count in an interlocking system that will not repeat for 52 years. Stucco masks begin to flank the stairways of temple platforms, enormous modelled faces of deities, painted in red and cream, their mouths open as if breathing the world into existence. The imagery already present in these early sculptures prefigures what later appears fully realized in the San Bartolo murals: the maize god dancing at the edge of creation, the hero twins descending into Xibalba to outwit the lords of death. A mythological architecture is being built alongside the physical one. Every platform, every mask, every alignment with the turning sky declares that this place stands at the axis of the cosmos, where earth and underworld and heaven converge beneath the sheltering branches of the saber tree. The forest is being reshaped. Where once unbroken canopy stretched to every horizon, clearings widen around growing centers. Raised causeways of packed white marl begin to connect communities across the seasonal swamps. The stones are rising. The stones are rising, and they will not stop. By the 4th century before the Common Era, the scattered centers of the Petén have entered a phase of construction that dwarfs anything previously attempted in the Americas. The causeways that once linked modest platforms now stretch for kilometers through seasonal swamps called bejos, their surfaces of packed white marl gleaming against the dark green of the surrounding forest. At the terminus of these roads, something unprecedented takes shape, a city so vast that its pyramids breach the jungle canopy and become visible from kilometers away, white summits floating above an ocean of green. El Mirador. The name is modern, Spanish, meaning the lookout. But the ancient city needs no translation. Its scale speaks. At its peak, sometime between the 3rd and 1st centuries before the Common Era, the settlement sprawls across 16 square kilometers. Population estimates range upward of 100,000 souls. The labor required to raise its monuments suggests a political authority capable of marshalling tens of thousands of workers across generations, quarrying limestone, burning it into plaster, hauling millions of cubic meters of rubble fill into position, then sheathing the results in brilliant white stucco. Two colossal structures dominate the skyline. El Tigre, a triadic pyramid complex on the city's western edge, rises 55 meters above the plaza floor. Its summit supports 3 temples arranged around a shared platform, a sacred architectural grammar that echoes the 3 hearthstones of Maya creation mythology. But El Tigre is not the largest. That distinction belongs to La Danta, on the eastern edge, a structure whose total volume reaches approximately 2.8 million cubic meters of fill. From base platform to temple summit, it stands 72 meters high. Its construction unfolded in phases spanning centuries, each generation adding mass and height to the work of its predecessors, entombing earlier surfaces beneath fresh layers of stone and plaster. Flanking the stairways of these monuments, enormous stucco masks stare outward, the faces of gods rendered at superhuman scale. The maize god emerges from the earth, his elongated skull mimicking the shape of a ripening ear of corn. Jaguar deities bare their fangs. The iconography is not decorative. It transforms each pyramid into a living cosmological machine, a sacred mountain where the boundary between the human world and the realm of the divine grows thin. Sakbiob radiate outward from El Mirador to satellite centers, Nakbe, Tintal, Wakna, binding them into a single political and economic network. These raised roads, some stretching over 20 kilometers, required enormous labor to construct through the waterlogged barrios. They represent infrastructure on a state level, enabling the movement of goods, laborers, and ritual processions regardless of seasonal flooding. Meanwhile, in the volcanic highlands of Guatemala, Caminaljuyu thrives as a jade trade hub. Its Miraflores phase tombs, dating to roughly the 3rd through 1st centuries before the Common Era, contain hundreds of jade objects, ear flares, pendants, masks, alongside obsidian blades and ceramic vessels. The wealth concentrated here reflects control over trade routes, linking Pacific coastal cacao lands to the lowland cities hungry for prestige materials. At San Bartolo, northeast of El Mirador, a small painted room, dated to approximately 100 years before the Common Era, preserves the oldest known fully realized Maya mural program. The maize god stands at the world's edge, offering his own blood to bring creation into being. The hero twins appear in their mythic roles. The painting confirms that by this date, the full narrative architecture of Maya cosmology, later recorded in the Popol Vuh, already exists in elaborate visual form. Then silence descends. By 150 of the Common Era, El Mirador's great plazas stand empty. Monument construction ceases. The Sakbiob fall into disrepair. The causes remain debated, deforestation visible in pollen cores, soil exhaustion from intensive agriculture feeding a swollen population, possible political fragmentation as subordinate centers break free. The white plaster surfaces crack and gray. Vegetation reclaims the stairways. The canopy closes overhead once more, swallowing the pyramids whole. The Preclassic titans have fallen into a sleep from which they will not wake for nearly 2,000 years. But the knowledge they generated, of kingship, of calendar, of cosmic architecture, migrates southward and eastward, seeding the dynasties that will soon declare themselves divine. The knowledge survives. It travels in the minds of priests and in the hands of stonemasons who carry their craft southward and eastward, away from the dying plazas of El Mirador, toward new centers where the forest has been cut back and fresh limestone quarried from the earth. The 2nd and 3rd centuries of the Common Era are a time of quiet reconstitution. The lowlands do not empty entirely. Smaller communities persist, tending their milpas, maintaining ritual cycles, but the age of Preclassic giants has ended. What emerges in its place is something more refined, more politically articulate, more obsessed with the legitimacy of individual rulers. At Tikal, in the heart of the Peten, a dynasty takes shape. Later texts will name its founder as Yax-eb-Zuk, placing him around the 1st century of the Common Era. His descendants build upon the North Acropolis, layering tomb over tomb in a palimpsest of royal burial that will accumulate for 6 centuries. Each interment is sealed beneath platforms of cut stone, the dead king adorned with jade pectorals and shell ear ornaments, his face covered in cinnabar pigment the color of blood. Above these tombs rise temples, modest at first, then increasingly ambitious, their roof combs catching the morning light above the canopy. The institution crystallizing here is the Ajor, the divine lord whose body bridges the human world and the supernatural. Emblem glyphs appear on carved monuments, each one a declaration of sovereign identity. The bundled water lily glyph of Tikal's mutal kingdom, distinct from the snakehead glyph that will later mark Calakmul's Khan dynasty. These are not mere labels. They are political claims carved in stone, asserting that each polity possesses its own sacred charter, its own line of holy kings stretching backward into mythological time. The long count calendar spreads across the lowlands during these centuries, its deep time notation anchoring royal events within a cosmic framework. A stela erected in the 3rd century records not merely a king's accession, but its precise position within a cycle of millions of days, linking the living ruler to the moment of creation itself. Astronomical knowledge serves political ends. The movements of Venus mark auspicious dates for warfare and ritual. Then, on the 16th of January, 378 of the Common Era, recorded in the long count as 11-eb-15 Mach, the political order of the lowlands shatters. A figure named Siaj Kaak, whose name translates as "fire is born," arrives at Tikal. He comes from the west, from the direction of the great metropolis of Teotihuacan in the Valley of Mexico, a city of 200,000 people whose influence radiates across Mesoamerica. On the same day that Siaj Kaak enters Tikal, the reigning king Chaktok Ichak I dies. The texts do not elaborate on the manner of death. They do not need to. Within months, a new ruler sits on Tikal's throne, Yax Nuun Ahin I, whose father is identified as spear-thrower Owl, almost certainly a lord of Teotihuacan itself. The architecture changes. Talud tablero platforms appear, the sloped and paneled style characteristic of Teotihuacan, grafted onto Maya temple bases. Ceramic vessels in Teotihuacan's cylindrical tripod form elite tombs. Warriors depicted on painted pots wear the goggle-eyed headdress of Teotihuacan's storm deity. Yet the Maya script continues. The long count persists. The local elite absorbs the foreign presence rather than being erased by it. This is not simple conquest. It is a political transformation that reshapes dynastic legitimacy across the lowlands. Kingdoms aligned with the new Tikal order adopt Teotihuacan-style regalia. Those that resist find themselves isolated. The reverberations reach as far as Copán, in the southeastern highlands of modern Honduras, where on the 6th of September, 426 of the Common Era, a lord named Cainich Yax Kuk Mo, radiant first Quetzal Makar, founds a new dynasty. Isotopic analysis of his bones reveals he spent years in the Petén before arriving at Copán. He carries Teotihuacan warrior imagery on his monuments. He establishes a lineage that will endure for 4 centuries. The age of divine kings has begun. Across the lowlands, polities declare themselves through carved stelae and painted stucco, each ruler standing at the center of a cosmos he claims to sustain through blood and ritual. The forest canopy parts for their temples. The long count marks their days. 2 powers now dominate the lowland world. Their rivalry will define a century and a half of Maya political life, drawing dozens of smaller kingdoms into gravitational orbits of alliance and subjugation from which there is no neutral ground. Tikal consolidates first. Under Siaj Chan Kawil II, who ascends to the throne around 411 of the Common Era and reigns until approximately 456, the city enters a period of confident expansion. New temples rise above the North Acropolis. Stelae proliferate, their carved surfaces depicting the king in full regalia, jade pectoral, Quetzal-plumed headdress, the double-headed serpent bar of royal authority clutched across his chest. Tikal's emblem glyph appears on monuments at subordinate sites, stretching east toward the Caribbean lowlands and south into the Petén heartland. Trade networks funnel obsidian from the highlands, marine shell from the coast, and cacao from the Piedmont into Tikal's markets. The city's population swells towards 60,000, but 130 kilometers to the north, in the dense Campeche jungle, another power is gathering mass. Calakmul, the place of the 2 adjacent mounds, rises around Structure 2, a pyramid of staggering volume whose broad base sprawls across nearly 2 hectares. The dynasty ruling here calls itself the Khan, the Snake Kingdom, and its emblem glyph, a stylized serpent head, begins appearing on monuments across an expanding network of client states. The Khan lords do not merely build, they orchestrate. Their strategy is patient, diplomatic, and ultimately devastating. Where Tikal projects power through direct military dominance, Calakmul weaves webs of obligation, marriage alliance, and coordinated aggression among second-tier kingdoms positioned along Tikal's borders. The glyph that marks total war in Maya inscriptions depicts a star showering droplets over a toponym, the so-called Star War event, signifying not a raid for captives but an assault aimed at dynastic destruction. These attacks target the sacred heart of a polity, its temples, its royal tombs, its patron deities. When a Star War succeeds, monuments are smashed, rulers are captured and sacrificed, and the defeated city enters political darkness. By the middle of the 6th century, Calakmul has assembled its coalition. Karakol, a powerful kingdom in the Vaca Plateau of modern Belize, becomes the instrument. Its ruler, Yajote Kenich II, aligns with the Snake Lords. The target is Tikal itself. On the long count date 96842, corresponding to the 29th of April, 562 of the Common Era, Karakol launches its star war against Tikal. The carved altar at Karakol recording this event is unambiguous. The attack succeeds. Tikal's ruling king, Wakchan Kawil, known also as Doublebird, vanishes from the record. Whether he dies in battle or is taken captive and sacrificed remains uncertain, but his fate is sealed. No monument is erected at Tikal for the next 130 years. This silence is extraordinary. For a city that had carved dated stelae for generations, the cessation speaks of profound political rupture, not necessarily abandonment, but a loss of the royal institution's capacity to project authority through stone. Calakmul's Yuknum Chin I likely orchestrated the entire campaign, positioning the Snake Kingdom as the paramount power of the central lowlands. The consequences ripple outward. Subordinate kingdoms that once looked to Tikal now redirect tribute and allegiance toward Calakmul. Dos Pilas, founded around 648 by a Tikal prince who eventually defects to Calakmul's orbit, becomes a weapon turned against its own lineage. Jade-inlaid war helmets and obsidian-edged clubs pass through Calakmul's workshops to allied warriors. The carved monuments of this era show bound captives stripped naked, their names recorded in glyphs beneath the feet of victorious lords. Tikal endures in silence. Its people remain. Its temples still stand. But the voice of its kings has been struck from stone, and the jungle presses closer against plazas where no new stelae rise. While Tikal endures its long silence far to the west, where the Chiapas highlands descend toward the Usumacinta floodplain, a city is being reborn. Palenque, known to its inhabitants as La Cama, Big Water, sits on a limestone shelf above the coastal plain, its temples cooled by mountain streams that cascade through aqueducts beneath the plazas. In 615 of the Common Era, a 12-year-old boy ascends to the throne. His name is Kenich Janab Pakal, and he will reign for 68 years, transforming this modest polity into one of the most artistically accomplished centers the Maya world has ever produced. The kingdom Pakal inherits is wounded. Calakmul's allies have sacked Palenque twice in living memory, in 599 and 611. Temples lie damaged. The royal lineage has been humiliated. Yet the young king, guided initially by his mother Sak-Kuk, herself of royal blood, begins a program of architectural renewal that will span decades. The palace complex grows organically, its galleries roofed not with simple corbel vaults, but with mansard-style profiles that allow thinner walls, wider interior spaces, and a 4-story tower unique in Maya architecture. Stucco reliefs of extraordinary delicacy cover every surface, portraits of ancestors, cosmological scenes, hieroglyphic texts rendered in flowing calligraphic style. Pakal's supreme monument is his own tomb. The Temple of the Inscriptions rises in 9 stepped tiers above the northern edge of the ceremonial core. Within its summit temple, 3 panels bear one of the longest hieroglyphic texts known, 617 glyph blocks recording Palenque's dynastic history. A hidden internal stairway, sealed with rubble, descends through the pyramid's heart to a vaulted crypt deep below plaza level. There, A monolithic limestone sarcophagus holds the king's remains, his face covered by a mosaic mask of jade, shell, and obsidian. The sarcophagus lid, carved in exquisite low relief, depicts Tikal at the moment of death, falling along the axis of the world tree into the open jaws of the earth, descending toward Xibalba while the celestial bird perches above. He dies on the long count date 9/12/11/518, 6 Etznab 11 Yaks, August 28, 683. His son Kinich Khan Bahlam II completes the tomb and raises the cross-group temples, each dedicated to a patron deity born at the dawn of the current creation. Palenque does not stand alone in this age of brilliance. Along the Usumachinta, Yaxchilan flourishes under Itzamnaj Bahlam III, Shield Jaguar, whose carved lintels depict his principal wife, Lady Cabal Zouk, drawing a thorn-lined rope through her tongue in blood-letting ecstasy, summoning a vision serpent from the offering smoke. His son, Bird Jaguar IV, continues the sculptural program, recording conquests and ritual acts with narrative sophistication unmatched elsewhere. To the southeast, Copán reaches its artistic zenith under its 13th ruler, Waxaclajun Uba Kawil, known as 18 Rabbit. His stelae stand in the great plaza like three-dimensional portraits, carved in such deep relief that the figures seem to step free from the stone. He commissions the hieroglyphic stairway, its 2,200 glyphs forming the longest known Maya text, recording the dynasty's full history. Yet ambition outreaches power. On May 3, 738, the subordinate Lord Keak Tiliu Chan Yopat of neighboring Quirigua captures and beheads 18 Rabbit, a vassal destroying his overlord, an act that stuns the political order of the southeastern lowlands. This is the paradox of the age. The 7th and early 8th centuries produce the finest sculpture, the deepest astronomical knowledge, the most sophisticated architecture the Maya will ever achieve. Yet the political system that sustains this brilliance remains fragile, a constellation of rival courts where a single battlefield defeat can silence a dynasty's voice forever. Beyond the temple summits and the carved stelae proclaiming royal victories, the vast majority of the classic Maya world lives closer to the earth. Between 600 and 800 of the Common Era, an estimated 3 to 10 million people inhabit the southern lowlands alone, and fewer than 1 in 100 ever sets foot inside a palace compound. Their world is the milpa, the cleared forest plot where maize, beans, and squash grow together in ancient symbiosis, the three sisters whose intertwined roots and leaves sustain an entire civilization. A commoner household occupies a raised platform of packed earth and rubble, perhaps 5 meters by 4, supporting a single-room structure of pole walls and palm thatch. Several such platforms cluster around a shared patio, where grinding stones sit worn smooth from decades of processing dried maize kernels into dough. Women rise before dawn to soak the kernels in lime water, a process called nixtamalization that unlocks niacin and prevents pellagra. A biochemical wisdom encoded in tradition long before anyone names the science. Isotopic analysis of classic period skeletal remains confirms that maize constitutes 70% or more of caloric intake for commoners, supplemented by beans, squash, chili, deer, peccary, freshwater fish, and the protein-rich seeds of the ramon tree. The agricultural calendar governs everything. Forest is felled in the dry months, burned before the rains arrive in May, and planted with a fire-hardened digging stick. After 2 or 3 seasons of diminishing yields, the plot returns to fallow for 8 to 15 years while the farmer clears new ground. In areas of denser population, the Palenque around Tikal, the Copán Valley, this extensive system proves insufficient. Terraces cut into hillsides retain soil on slopes. Raised fields built above seasonal wetlands create permanently cultivable surfaces bordered by canals that yield fish and nutrient-rich muck for fertilizer. Beyond subsistence, a complex exchange economy connects the lowlands. Obsidian arrives from highland Guatemalan sources at El Chayal and Ixtepeque, distributed through workshops where specialists produce prismatic blades of extraordinary sharpness. Salt, evaporated from coastal lagoons along the northern Yucatan shore, travels inland along river routes. Cacao, grown in the humid Piedmont and riverine zones, functions simultaneously as elite beverage, ritual offering, and currency. A single cacao bean purchases a tamale, 100 purchase a slave. Markets likely operate on periodic schedules in larger centers, though the archaeological evidence remains debated. Women dominate textile production, working backstrap looms to create cotton cloth dyed with indigo and decorated with brocade patterns that signal lineage and status. Cloth serves as tribute payment, diplomatic gift, and trade commodity. The labor invested in a single elite garment represents weeks of skilled work. In the ball courts, stone-walled alleys flanked by sloping benches, the rubber ball strikes with a sound like thunder. The game carries cosmological weight, reenacting the hero twins' descent into the underworld. Players deflect the heavy solid rubber ball with hips, forearms, and padded yokes, competing before audiences that include captive lords whose fate may hinge on the ritual outcome. Every major center maintains at least one court. Tikal has several. At the apex of intellectual life, scribes called Tzib, those of the writing, train within elite lineages, mastering the 800 or more signs of the hieroglyphic script. They paint codices on bark paper, incise bone, and decorate polychrome ceramic vessels with mythological narratives and palace scenes. Literacy remains restricted to perhaps 1 or 2% of the population, concentrated among royalty, priesthood, and specialized artisan families. Their knowledge encompasses not only writing, but astronomy, mathematics, calendar computation, and the ritual protocols that bind human time to cosmic cycles. This is the world the temples crown but do not contain. Millions of lives organized around soil, rain, fire, and the slow turning of seasons, sustaining the courts above through labor, tribute, and belief. But the world those millions sustain is already fracturing. By the middle of the 8th century, the intricate web of alliance and tribute that held the southern lowlands together begins to unravel, not in a single catastrophic moment, but in a slow hemorrhage of authority, resources, and faith. Dos Pilas falls first, and its fall is violent. Around 761 of the Common Era, the city that had served as a Tikal splinter state and Calakmul proxy for over a century collapses into open warfare. The ruling lineage loses control. Invaders, or perhaps its own desperate population, tear apart the ceremonial temples stone by stone, dragging carved blocks and facing stones down from pyramid summits to construct hasty defensive palisades around the central plaza. Sacred architecture becomes fortification material. The hieroglyphic stairway that once proclaimed royal victories is buried beneath rubble walls barely 2 meters high. The population scatters into surrounding hilltop redoubts at Aguateca and Punta de Chimino, where narrow isthmuses and deep ravines offer natural defense. Aguateca itself burns suddenly, its residents fleeing so quickly that they leave grinding stones, ceramic vessels, and half-finished obsidian tools on workshop floors, a Pompeii of the Petex Batun. This pattern of militarized collapse radiates outward. Warfare intensifies not between great powers pursuing dynastic prestige, but among fragmenting polities fighting for diminishing resources. The elegant conventions of earlier conflict, the capture of rival kings for ritual sacrifice, the erection of victory monuments, give way to something rawer. Fortification walls appear at sites that never needed them. Trade networks contract as routes become dangerous. Tikal had experienced its own resurgence decades earlier. Jasar Chan Karweel I defeated Calakmul's forces in 695, ending the long humiliation that began with the Star War of 562. His successors raised temples 1 and 2 above the Great Plaza, monuments of renewed confidence. But this revival proves temporary. By the late 8th century, Tikal's reservoirs, the engineered water systems that sustained a population of perhaps 60,000 through annual dry seasons, show signs of contamination and diminished capacity. The surrounding landscape, cleared of forest for centuries of intensive agriculture, can no longer regenerate its soils. The climate itself turns hostile. Speleothem records from caves across the Yucatan Peninsula reveal a series of severe multi-decadal droughts beginning around 800 of the Common Era, with particularly devastating dry intervals between 820 and 870. Rainfall drops well below the levels needed to sustain rain-fed maize agriculture. The great reservoirs of Tikal, Calakmul, and Karakol, designed to carry populations through normal dry seasons of 4 to 5 months, cannot buffer against years of failed rains. The monuments fall silent one by one. Copán's last dated stela is carved in 822. Quirigua ceases monument production by 810. Calakmul's final inscription dates to 809. Tikal's last known monument bears a date in 869. A stela left unfinished, its carving rough and hurried compared to the masterworks of earlier centuries. Across the Palenque, the long count calendar that had recorded royal history for 600 years simply stops being inscribed in stone. Skeletal remains from terminal deposits tell their own story. Bone chemistry reveals increasing reliance on maize with fewer supplementary protein sources. Dental pathology shows malnutrition. Harris lines on long bones indicate repeated episodes of growth arrest in children. The population of the Palenque, once numbering in the millions, declines by 90 to 95% over the next 2 centuries. Cities that housed tens of thousands stand empty. Plaster plazas crack under the sun. Sapodilla wood lintels rot. The jungle begins its patient reconquest. Yet this is not extinction. It is redistribution. As the southern lowlands empty, the northern Yucatan, with its shallower soils but accessible cenotes, receives migrants. The Puuc Hills flourish. Uxmal, Cabá, Sayil rise in architectural brilliance precisely as Tikal and Calakmul fall. At Tonana, in the Chiapas highlands, a final long count date is carved in 909 of the Common Era, the last breath of a tradition born over a millennium earlier. The silence that follows is not the silence of death. It is the silence of transformation. The transformation is already underway. Even as the last monuments fall silent in the Petén, the northern Yucatan Peninsula is alive with construction. Here the limestone shelf lies closer to the surface, the soil thinner, the forest lower. But beneath the porous rock, cenotes open into vast underground reservoirs that guarantee water even in the driest years. It is to this landscape that Maya civilization migrates, and in doing so, reinvents itself. The Puuc Hills, a low ridge running through what is now southern Yucatan state, become the stage for an architectural revolution. At Uxmal, the Pyramid of the Magician rises with its distinctive rounded corners and steep elliptical base, unlike anything built in the southern lowlands. Its surfaces carry not the stucco modeling of Palenque or Tikal, but intricate stone mosaic facades, thousands of individually carved limestone pieces fitted together like a three-dimensional puzzle. Long-nosed Chak masks, the rain deity rendered in geometric abstraction, repeat in stacked rows across palace facades at Kabar, where the Cod's Poop building presents over 250 such masks in a single wall. At Sail, a three-story palace with columned porticos suggests a shift from divine spectacle toward administrative grandeur. Sakbiob link these cities into a regional network. Under Lord Chak, who reigns at Uxmal around 900 to 915 of the Common Era, the Puuc tradition reaches its apex, the governor's palace stretching over 90 meters in length, its mosaic frieze encoding astronomical alignments to Venus. Yet even as the Puuc cities flourish, a greater power consolidates 60 kilometers to the east. Chichen Itza is something the Maya world has never seen before, a cosmopolitan capital that absorbs influences from central Mexico and transforms them into something entirely new. The Castillo Pyramid dominates the central plaza, its 4 stairways of 91 steps each, plus the summit platform, totaling 365, one for each day of the solar year. At each spring and autumn equinox, the descending sun casts triangular shadows along the northern balustrade, creating the illusion of a feathered serpent undulating down the stairway toward the carved serpent head at the base. The Great Ball Court stretches 166 meters in length, the largest in all Mesoamerica. Its vertical walls carry carved panels depicting decapitation sacrifice, and its acoustics allow a voice at one end to carry clearly to the other. The Temple of the Warriors rises on a broad platform, flanked by colonnades of square pillars, each carved with individual warrior portraits, Atlantean figures bearing weapons and regalia that echo the distant Toltec capital of Tula in Hidalgo, over 1,000 kilometers to the west. Calakmul sculptures recline before temple doorways, their flat bellies serving as offering platforms. Whether Chichen Itza is ruled by a single royal dynasty or by a multipal, a council of lords sharing power, remains debated. The architecture itself suggests collective governance, the proliferation of gallery patio structures, the absence of a single dominant royal portrait tradition, the emphasis on warrior orders rather than divine kings. The caracol, a circular tower rising from a rectangular platform, functions as an astronomical observatory, its windows aligned to Venus extremes on the horizon. The sacred cenote, a natural sinkhole 60 meters in diameter with sheer limestone walls dropping 27 meters to dark green water, serves as the city's most potent ritual space. Into its depths go offerings of gold discs repoussé worked with battle scenes, jade pendants, copal incense, ceramic vessels, carved bone, and human remains. men, women, and children sacrificed to the rain deities dwelling below. When Edward Thompson dredges the cenote between 1904 and 1910, he recovers thousands of objects confirming centuries of continuous ritual use. At its peak between 900 and 1100 of the Common Era, Chichen Itza commands trade routes stretching from the turquoise sources of the American Southwest to the gold-working regions of Lower Central America. Its influence radiates across the peninsula. Then, by approximately 1100, monument construction ceases. The reasons remain unclear: internal factional conflict, perhaps, or the disruption of trade networks. The city does not burn, it simply stops growing. Pilgrims will continue visiting the sacred cenote for centuries, but political power shifts elsewhere. The serpent's shadow still descends the Castillo stairs each equinox, marking time in a city whose rulers have departed, but whose stones endure. After Chichen Itza's political silence, the northern Yucatan fractures into competing lineages. For more than a century, no single center commands the peninsula. Then, around 1220 of the Common Era, a new capital coalesces on the flat limestone plain, roughly 40 kilometers southeast of the old power, Mayapan, a walled city that will dominate Yucatan for over 200 years. The city's perimeter wall stretches more than 9 kilometers, enclosing a densely packed urban core of approximately 4,000 structures. At its height, between 12,000 and 17,000 people live within these walls. Nobles, priests, merchants, artisans, and servants crowded together in a settlement pattern unlike anything the Classic period produced. There are no vast ceremonial plazas separating commoners from royalty. Residential compounds press close against temple platforms. At the center stands a pyramid deliberately modeled on Chichen Itza's Castillo, though smaller and less precisely constructed. Its 9 terraces and radial stairways announce continuity with the Serpent City's legacy. Yet the craftsmanship tells a different story: rough-cut stone covered in thick plaster, speed valued over perfection. Power at Mayapan belongs to the Copán lineage, but it is not the divine kingship of the Classic Ajor. The Copán rule through a multiple system, a joint council where heads of noble houses share governance. Rival lineages, the Shu, the Canul, the Chel, maintain their own compounds within the walls, their representatives participating in collective decision-making even as they chafe under Copán dominance. The Copán reinforce their authority through mercenary warriors brought from the Tabasco coast, speakers of Nahuatl-influenced languages whose presence reminds local nobles that resistance carries consequences. This is a world reshaped by commerce. Long-distance maritime trade canoes, massive dugouts capable of carrying 40 passengers and tons of cargo, ply the Caribbean coast from the Bay of Honduras northward around the peninsula to the Gulf Coast ports of Tabasco and Veracruz. At Tulum, perched on limestone cliffs above turquoise waters, a beacon fire guides traders into the small cove below. Obsidian from highland Guatemala, gold discs and bells from lower Central America, turquoise from far northern sources, salt harvested from Yucatan's coastal flats, honey, cotton mantles, cacao, all flow through networks that make merchant lords as powerful as warriors. Far to the south, in the volcanic highlands of Guatemala, a parallel transformation unfolds. The Quiché people, organized into powerful confederated lineages, expand aggressively from their capital at Cuauhtémoc, a fortified city set on a plateau surrounded by deep ravines. Under the ruler Tikal, who reigns from approximately 1425 to 1475, Quiche's dominion extends across much of highland Guatemala. Their sacred text, later transcribed as the Popol Vuh, preserves a cosmology stretching back to creation itself. The hero twins' descent into Xibalba, the fashioning of humanity from maize dough, the migrations of ancestral lineages. But confederation breeds fracture. Around 1470, the Kaqchikel, once subordinate allies of the Quiche, break away violently, establishing their own capital at Iximche on a defensible plateau. The highlands splinter into rival kingdoms that will still be warring when Spanish boots first touch their soil. Back in Yucatan, the tensions within Mayapan's walls reach their breaking point. In 1441, the Chu faction rises against the Cocom. The revolt is swift and total. The Cocom lords are slaughtered, all but one, absent on a trading mission to Honduras. The city burns, its temples are abandoned. No new capital replaces it. Instead, Yucatan dissolves into 16 independent provinces, each governed by its own halach-winik, its own council, its own ambitions. The Maya world at the threshold of European contact is not a single kingdom awaiting conquest. It is a fractured mosaic of competing states, merchant networks, and ancient rivalries, politically divided but culturally unified by shared language, calendar, and cosmology. The walls of Mayapan crumble into the scrub forest, and the peninsula waits, unknowing, for the sails that will appear on the eastern horizon within a single human lifetime. The sails appear in 1502. A Spanish caravel under Columbus's fourth voyage encounters a large trading canoe off the Bay Islands of Honduras, a vessel carved from a single tree trunk, 8 feet wide, laden with cacao, copper bells, obsidian blades, and cotton textiles dyed in brilliant colors. The paddlers wear finely woven garments. The cargo speaks of a sophisticated commercial world stretching from the Yucatan coast to the Gulf of Honduras. Columbus notes the encounter and sails south toward Panama. The Maya trading networks continue undisturbed for another 15 years. In 1517, Francisco Hernández de Córdoba leads 3 ships westward from Cuba, seeking slaves and gold. His expedition reaches the Yucatan coast at Cape Catoche, where Maya warriors in quilted cotton armor and carrying obsidian-edged swords meet the Spaniards on the beach. The initial encounter turns violent. Córdoba presses southward along the coast to Champoton, where a large Maya force attacks at dawn, killing more than 50 Spaniards and wounding nearly all the rest, including Córdoba himself, who sustains over 30 wounds. He dies shortly after returning to Cuba. The Maya of Champoton have repelled the first serious European incursion with devastating effectiveness. Juan de Grijalva follows in 1518, mapping the coast but avoiding prolonged engagement. Then Hernán Cortés passes through in 1519, pausing only to collect the shipwrecked Spaniard Jerónimo de Aguilar, who has lived among the Maya for 8 years and speaks Yucatec, before pressing onward toward the Aztec heartland. The Maya coast remains unconquered. The highlands fall first. In February of 1524, Pedro de Alvarado marches south from the newly conquered Aztec capital with roughly 400 Spanish soldiers, cavalry, and thousands of Mexican allied warriors. The Quiche Kingdom, the most powerful highland Maya state, musters its forces under the war captain Tecún Umán near Quetzaltenango. At the Battle of El Pinar, Spanish cavalry and steel weapons shatter the Quiche formations. Alvarado advances to Cumarcaj, the Quiche capital, accepts an invitation to enter, suspects a trap, and burns the city. The Quiche lords are executed. Within weeks, the Caciquel, initially allied with Alvarado against their Quiche rivals, realize the nature of Spanish demands for tribute and gold. They rebel, retreating to their mountain strongholds. A grinding guerrilla war follows for years. Alvarado establishes Santiago de Guatemala as the colonial capital, and the highland kingdoms are broken one by one. The Yucatan lowlands prove far more resistant. Francisco de Montejo the Elder launches his first campaign in 1527, landing on the eastern coast. Maya resistance is fierce, organized, and relentless. The terrain offers no rivers for easy transport, no central capital whose capture might end resistance. Each province fights independently. Montejo retreats by 1528. A second campaign from the western coast in 1531 through 1535 also fails. Only in 1540, when Montejo the Younger takes command, does sustained conquest begin. On January 6, 1542, the Spaniards found the city of Mérida atop the ancient Maya settlement of Tahoe, using the cut stones of its pyramids as building material for a colonial cathedral and government buildings. Resistance continues for years. The eastern provinces hold out until 1546, when a coordinated Maya uprising nearly expels the Spaniards entirely. The revolt is crushed with extreme violence, and by 1547, most of the peninsula is under nominal Spanish control, though the deep interior forests remain beyond colonial reach for another century and a half. Then comes the cultural assault. On July 12, 1562, the Franciscan friar Diego de Landa, convinced that Maya converts are secretly practicing idolatry, orders an auto da fe at the town of Mani. At least 27 hieroglyphic codices, bark paper books containing centuries of astronomical tables, ritual calendars, historical records, and accumulated knowledge, are burned in a single afternoon. 5,000 carved cult images and hundreds of painted vessels are smashed. Landa himself later writes a partial account of the Maya calendar and script, preserving fragments of what he helped destroy. 3 codices survive today in European libraries. The rest, the intellectual heritage of a civilization spanning 2 millennia, turns to ash in the Yucatan heat. Yet the ash at Mani does not mark the end. Deep in the Petén lowlands, beyond the reach of Spanish garrisons and Franciscan missions, the Itzá kingdom endures. Their capital, Noj Petén, sits on an island in Lake Petén Itzá, a fortress of temples and whitewashed houses accessible only by canoe, surrounded by waters that Spanish expeditions cannot easily cross. For 175 years after the fall of the highland kingdoms, the Itzá maintain their independence. Hernán Cortés himself passed near the lake in 1525 during his disastrous march to Honduras, and the Itzá survived that encounter intact. They continue to worship in open temples, to consult their priesthood, to govern through their own lineage system. Spanish attempts at diplomatic conversion fail repeatedly. The Itzá reject baptism, expel missionaries, and on at least one occasion kill Franciscan envoys who venture too close. Across the conquered territories, colonial administrators implement the policy of reducción, the forced resettlement of dispersed Maya farming communities into nucleated towns built around a central church and plaza. The logic is control. Concentrated populations are easier to tax, evangelize, and surveil. Maya laborers construct the very churches that replace their temples, often raising colonial walls directly atop ancient platform mounds, embedding carved stones from older structures into new foundations. European diseases, smallpox, measles, typhus, influenza, sweep through these concentrated settlements with devastating efficiency. By 1600, the Maya population of Yucatan has fallen by roughly 90% from pre-contact levels. Yet beneath the imposed Catholic surface, continuity persists. Between 1554 and 1558, Quiche Maya nobles transcribe the Popol Vuh into Latin script, preserving the creation narrative, the hero twins' descent into Xibalba, and the mythological foundations of their civilization. In Yucatan, community scribes compose the books of Chilam Balam, blending prophecy, history, and calendrical knowledge into colonial-era manuscripts that encode ancient wisdom in European letters. Maya farmers continue planting milpa. Maya mothers continue weaving on backstrap looms. The old calendar counts persist in ritual contexts that priests cannot penetrate. On March 13, 1697, the Spanish commander Martín de Ursúa finally launches an assault across Lake Petén Itzá. A single galley armed with cannon crosses the water. The Itzá defenders, numbering in the thousands, fight from canoes with arrows and stones, but gunpowder decides the outcome within hours. Nojpetén falls. The last independent Maya kingdom ceases to exist, 206 years after Columbus first encountered Maya traders at sea. The colonial centuries grind forward. Haciendas expand across Yucatan, converting communal Maya lands into private estates producing cattle, sugar, and eventually henequen fiber. Maya communities lose land, autonomy, and legal standing. Resentment accumulates across generations. In 1761, a Maya man named Jacinto Canec leads a brief but explosive revolt near the town of Xistel, declaring himself king and calling for the expulsion of the Spanish. Colonial forces crush the uprising within weeks. Canec is publicly tortured and executed in Mérida's central plaza. But the deeper reckoning comes in 1847. The caste war of Yucatan erupts in July, a coordinated Maya uprising against the Creole landowners who have dispossessed them for 3 centuries. Maya forces under leaders like Cecilio Chi and Jacinto Pat sweep across the peninsula, burning haciendas, capturing towns, driving the non-Maya population toward the coastal cities of Mérida and Campeche. By 1848, the Maya hold nearly the entire peninsula. The war halves Yucatan's population through combat, famine, and flight. Around 1850, rebel Maya establish an independent state centered on the town of Chan Santa Cruz, organized around a speaking cross, an oracle that delivers prophecy and military commands, fusing Catholic symbolism with Maya spiritual authority. This independent Maya polity resists Mexican government forces for half a century. The Mexican army does not recapture Chan Santa Cruz until May of 1901. 3 centuries of resistance finally yield to industrial-age military power, but the Maya remain. The Maya remain, and in the 20th century, the world begins to rediscover what they built and who they still are. In the early 1900s, archaeologists push deeper into the Petén. Alfred Maudslay has already photographed and cast the monuments of Copán, Quirigua, and Palenque in the 1880s and 90s. Teobert Mahler documents dozens of sites along the Usumacinta. Sylvanus Morley spends decades recording long count dates across the lowlands for the Carnegie Institution. Yet the glyphs themselves remain largely unread, their phonetic nature denied by a Western scholarly establishment convinced that Maya writing is purely ideographic. The breakthrough comes from an unlikely source. In 1952, a young Soviet linguist named Yuri Knorosov, working in Leningrad with only published reproductions of the surviving codices, demonstrates that Maya glyphs function as a mixed logographic syllabic script, that signs represent sounds, not merely concepts. Western Mayanists initially reject his work, but the evidence accumulates. In 1960, Tatiana Proskuriakov publishes her landmark study of Piedras Negras Stellae, proving that the inscriptions record historical events, births, accessions, conquests, of real rulers, not mythological cycles. By the 1970s and 80s, Linda Shaler, Peter Matthews, David Stewart, and others accelerate the decipherment until, by the 1990s, scholars read classic Maya texts with near-complete fluency. The ancient kings speak again. But while academics unlock the past, the living Maya endure catastrophe. In Guatemala, a civil war that begins in 1960 escalates through the 70s into outright genocide. The Guatemalan military, targeting indigenous communities suspected of supporting guerrilla movements, conducts scorched earth campaigns in the highlands. Between 1981 and 1983, under the regime of Efraín Ríos Montt, entire Maya Ixil, Quiche, Quechua, and Achi villages are massacred, men, women, children burned in churches, buried in mass graves. The Commission for Historical Clarification, established after the 1996 peace accords, documents over 200,000 killed during the conflict, 83% of them indigenous Maya. It constitutes genocide under international law. The land that once sustained the classic kingdoms becomes a killing ground. Yet survival persists. More than 6 million Maya people speak over 30 living languages today across Guatemala, Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. In the highlands around Lake Atitlan, Tzutujil and Kachikal communities maintain ceremonial traditions stretching back centuries. In Yucatan, children learn Yucatec Maya in bilingual schools. Farmers still plant milpa, maize, beans, squash, using techniques refined over millennia. Women weave huipil textiles whose geometric patterns encode cosmological knowledge passed through generations. And the ancient cities keep revealing their scale. In 2018, the Pacunam LIDAR initiative surveys over 2,100 square kilometers of the Petén, its laser pulses penetrating the jungle canopy to map the ground beneath. The results stagger the archaeological world. Over 61,000 previously unknown structures emerge from the data. Defensive walls, raised causeways, terraced agricultural fields, reservoir systems, all invisible from the surface, all testifying to a civilization far larger and more interconnected than anyone had imagined. The Maya lowland supported millions. The forest that seemed to swallow these cities had merely hidden them. Tikal receives UNESCO World Heritage status in 1979. Palenque follows in 1987. Copán in 1980. Chichen Itza in 1988. These designations protect the stones, but the living culture needs no monument to endure. It endures in language, in corn, in the rhythm of planting and harvest, in the woven thread and the spoken word. 3,000 years of continuous presence on this land, through kingdoms and collapse, through conquest and genocide, through silence and rediscovery. The Maya were never lost. They were always here. Thank you for joining this journey through the complete story of the Maya. If these voices from the past resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss a new exploration of the civilizations that shaped our world.